Welcome to On the Brink, a fresh lens to take you and your business to new heights. Hi, I'm Andi Simon. I'm your host and your guide. And as I tell you, for every one of these podcasts, my job is to get you off the brink. I want you to soar. And to do that, sometimes you're going to have to change. And as you know, I used to preach that if you want to change, have a crisis or create one. I never expected this crisis, but I do know that we are very busy with people coming in saying, I have to change. Can you lend a hand? How do I change? I've had a great business. I've had a great life, a great career. I'm a professional, but it's not working quite so well anymore. And I'm having a huge turnover of all of my staff. What do I do? And so the questions are coming. The question is, can I help them using our podcast to provide you with great ideas? So I have Jim Cornehlsen today. And Jim has become a wonderful friend of ours as he brings all of his expertise and ideas to us so that we can better understand a different perspective on how we can all change. A little anthropology, but a lot of business experience. So let me tell you about Jim. Jim has a broad-based career with 20 years in line management and sales development, and then 20 years of professional service selling. He's a senior advisor at Artemis Partnership, and he helps company leaders and sales teams win proposals, relationships, alliances. Now, he brings his perspective and his expertise to you so that you don't have to work so hard. Sometimes it's better to learn together and collaborate. He also does personal work in helping CEOs and leadership teams get everything they want out of their business, and sometimes things that they didn't notice were there at all. And he's a professional facilitator with EOS. Are you familiar with EOS, my audience out there? If you're not, and you're an entrepreneur, it might be a good time to pay attention and listen to what EOS can do to help structure it. I work with one client who just loves EOS, provides exactly the framework to allow her to grow her business in a very professional and process-driven way. So he's chair for Chief Executive Network, working with peer-to-peer CEO groups in a facilitation and coaching role. Actually, Jim is far more than all of these things. I'm going to let him tell you his story, because as you know, it's in our story that we come alive. It also legitimizes what he's going to tell you about how he can help you do things better, see the world through a fresh lens, and begin to help it all thrive. So, Jim, thank you for joining me.
Hey, it's delightful to be here. And I think both you and I share a passion about entrepreneurial energy. I mean, there just is a huge amount going on. Ironically, 50% of that effort is now led by female leaders.
That's right. Well, but it's a very difficult time even for women. 12 million companies are run and owned by women today, but 10 million of them are solopreneurs. And half of those aren't making $10,000 a year. They're side hustles. So it's telling us something about the word entrepreneur, about what's a business, how you can create enterprise. So tell the audience about your own personal career. You're both in the large companies as well as an entrepreneur yourself. Please.
Well, in the large companies, GE, then McGraw-Hill, then CBS, I largely had product development, market development roles. So I was an intrapreneur in larger companies. In McGraw-Hill, I lived in Mexico, Spain, and Canada. We were building small companies in each of those places. At CBS, I was head of international sales, but also wound up on a project that became a joint venture that became Prodigy. So in all of these areas, there was something entrepreneurial going on, even though it was a large corporate setting. So I had the opportunity to become CEO of a Hispanic company in New York, and in essence, sat in your seat, struggling to make this company go. We had people issues, we had inventory issues, we had silos with people doing their own things. So I sort of lived that painful journey. We finally got things right, and we sold the company for 3 times revenues. Had the Spaniards stuck around, they would have made a lot of money, because you know the Hispanic market is 33% of the US, and this company itself is now part of Univision. So that sort of led to the consulting piece of the career, where I was a partner and director at Heidrick & Struggles, and we were asking companies primarily to focus on the future, to focus on what leadership needs will be 5 years from now, not those that were needed 5 years before.
Yep.
it led to a lot of work we did with private equity companies, finding C-suite and CEO leaders for these entrepreneurial internet companies. And I got absolutely fascinated with what we'll call, with quotes, the entrepreneurial role, the entrepreneurial challenges of being a leader. I also got very involved with the issues of female leadership. Interestingly enough, John Gersma, is one of my good friends, now CEO of Harris. He did some landmark research we can talk about another time, but it's fascinating. So this sort of led to a concentration of working with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial companies, trying to help them either, as you said, create a framework for growth, or to help them navigate their way to get the obstacles to growth out of their way.
Yep. Now, as you were doing this, it sounds like you had a bit of an aha moment about the role you love to play in the companies you love to work with. And, can you share that a little bit? Because you bring a particular perspective that enables people to hear and listen to what you're saying and then to do it. Because some consultants and coaches are really smart, but they don't get folks to actually do and move the needle. And being in the consulting industry myself, it's very hard to get people to hear what you're saying and know what it means. What did you learn?
Well, this is an interesting topic because many people say, oh, I'm having people, process, or profit issues, and it sort of feels fuzzy and it's undefined and it gives them a headache and keeps them awake at night. What we find is that most entrepreneurs are frustrated when they feel stuck. They just are not quite sure of the way forward. And what's interesting is that Dr. Larry Greiner and a number of others at MIT did research showing growth is not like that hockey stick that sort of goes straight up. It goes in spurts. You hit a ceiling, you have an growth spurt, you hit another ceiling. So the trick is to learn to break through these ceilings. So there are a number of, I'd say 4 or 5 sort of basic principles that we try and talk about with leaders. The easiest or the most difficult is simplify. Where are we going and how are we going to get there? It's interesting, but you will relate to this statistic. 40% of people don't know exactly how they're going to get there. 40% cannot explain what the business performance is. And worse yet, 40% can't quite link their role to what the business goals are.
No.
So what a difficult process to jump into as a CEO or leader. The other thing we help people try and do is to learn to delegate. Very tough, particularly for women. If you delegate and elevate, you wind up in that upper quadrant box doing what you're good at and what you love to do. If you don't, you're buried in the lower quadrant box doing lots of stuff that's weighing you down and you can't relate to. The third thing, of course, is predicting, something that you are famous for, to get better at creating the big picture rather than being buried in the day-to-day checklist. So, we create a rhythm that sort of is quarterly, 90 days and another 90 days and another 90 days to come up for air and look at what have we gotten done and what do we have to do. It's about the right cycle. If it's a year or 3 years or 5 years, it gets too long because you're not acting. Then, of course, we try and systemize. The issue, of course, is to write down core processes so you can always be doing them properly. You can always be doing your best, and you can always be doing them in a way you connect. But as you know, many people are very scattered. They deal with different clients differently. They deal with their internal people differently, and they don't really write down what the process is for how they relate to customers, for how they relate to production, for how they get their financial work done. And then the last thing, of course, is structure, to move away from decisions that are all emotionally driven by personalities in smaller companies and driven by whatever may be the latest fad. And of course, these defined roles and the connection are what are critical to sort of structuring the business and getting, Column says, the right people in the right seat.
Having lived with a serial entrepreneur for many years, many, many years now, both of us are well aware of the things that you're talking about because the joy of being an entrepreneur is usually you have a platform on which to take your purpose and your passions and begin to develop them into a business. And you assemble people who at the time are affordable and embrace it, but not necessarily process driven, not necessarily know how they're all together to the vision of where you're going. And it's really interesting to watch as you grow to your platform. How do you reach that point where it's time to change the people there, change the story? Remember, we live our daily stories. So this approach is extremely built on stories, and begin to give them a new story about the next phase and where we're going there. And I can only tell you, having lived with it, it is a wonderful experiment in human transformation, because some entrepreneurs find that they can't go to the next level. They really are perfectly happy being here. I used to think it's like pulling out into the center lane and getting stuck. You got it going, you moved over, and it never gets to the fast track. It's always stuck here in a fashion. But it's as you and I asked you, how do you get them to hear you? Because for our work, we the simple sells, because nobody really knows what the words mean when we say, we're going to be more collaborative. We're working with a multi-hospital healthcare system, and they want to go from command and control to collaboration. But the folks are looking at me as if to say, what does that mean? How do I, in fact, do that? Will I know if it's the right thing to do? I'm waiting for someone to tell me because I grew up in a command and control culture, and now they want me to do something I'm unfamiliar with. It's a really interesting and challenging time because so much is being asked of folks. What have you found?
Well, one of my favorite current books is by Richard Boyatzis, who's at Case Western Reserve. He was one of the early research team that worked with Dan Goleman on emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And his new book is called Helping People Change. And
great.
He has a real values-based approach. And I've found, particularly with the female leaders that I work with, that starting with a core values approach really defines who you are and whom you want to attract, more importantly. So there's an exercise here that you as a corporate anthropologist will appreciate. Ask everyone on the leadership team to pick 3 people who would make this company absolutely unstoppable, going from unstuck to unstoppable, getting out there and really winning all the business. And then as you think of these 3 people, write down the characteristics, the behaviors that they in fact exhibit in the company. You may wind up with a list that's 30 or 40 characteristics. The goal for the leadership team is to sort of discover these values together and get the list down to 3 to 7. Then when you're hiring or when you're doing a people review, you can take those 5 values, let's say, with 3 other things we call get it, want it, and has the capacity to do it.
Uh-huh.
And you rate plus or plus minus, and you establish some kinds of bar. You say for those 8 things, if 5 of them are plus and 3 of them are plus minus, we don't want any minuses. It's a great way to galvanize the value that someone is leading by and someone is telling stories about, not only to their employees, but to their customers.
Yes, that is very interesting. So if I heard you correctly, the exercise is to take 3 people who you'd like to be on your team, and what are the values or behaviors that they exhibit that are so important to the success of what is being done by the organization or by your own department in some fashion.
Exactly. And for those of you who find this a little cloudy to think about, Dr. Boyatzis has a piece in his book that actually gives you the checklist to help evaluate what these values are. The other thing I think that really relates to right people in the right seat is, sort of getting this gets it, wants it, has the capacity to do it. Capacity can be trained, but the getting it and wanting it has really got to be internal. It's part of their story and what their story will become. And your goal, of course, as a growth company leader is to make your story part of their story.
Yep.
So it becomes an interesting dialogue. And the recommendation, of course, is work with the leadership team, because as goes the leadership team, even if it's 4 people, so goes the rest of the company. But once a quarter, have an all hands, all meeting discussion to say, here's where we are and here's where we're going.
You know, we used to do these as strategy councils, and I found that the model was excellent for the morning to be a reflection on what we said we were going to do and how well we've done it. And the afternoons were really good times for us to dig into challenges or opportunities that were coming. But what was most important was getting the team together. And the socializing, and maybe not easy now, was that these folks were all, once they decided where they were going, they all went off to go do it. But unless you came back once a quarter, you didn't know who was doing what, where. Communication always fell short. It didn't matter how hard you try to make it work, because you don't have time to know what's going on. So you hope the ship is going in one direction, not 5 or 10, and that it's all moving in the same fashion. But this is important. When you talk about all of this capacity in hiring the right people, I'll tell you a story about the diversity dilemma. I'll call it the diversity dilemma. People now want to build a diverse, equitable, and inclusive team. And so I was listening in to some CEOs bemoaning the fact that it took them 3 months to hire a woman who was a woman of color. And they brought her into their organization. This was in the Midwest. And she only lasted 3 weeks, 3 months, not 3 weeks, 3 months. And they were angry that she didn't stay. It took them so long to hire somebody who they thought was so good, and why didn't she stay? And somebody else said, well, we just don't understand the culture they come from, and we don't understand what they're looking for, and this is who we are, don't they get it? And I said, this is so interesting, as if the new hire was the problem in helping you provide a diverse workplace for that new hire, as opposed to really understanding how to change the whole culture. You know, you wanted to talk a little bit about corporate anthropology. Culture is a recurring theme here, because if you're going to build diversity with the right people in the right jobs, you're going to have to rethink what that means. How does that person behave? What do they say? How do you include them in the conversation? How will you make them feel like they belong? Very powerful questions for today, because if we're going to build a really talented, diverse, inclusive workforce, we're going to have to really rethink that culture in which they're moving, and take a look at who's around. Are they all white guys and you're trying to make them all diverse? And then I'll tell you another story in a moment. Your thoughts?
The health of the leadership team is so critical, and their ability to work together, particularly in these companies that are being fueled by Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, etc. And the mandate is for all of us is to be open, honest, and a bit vulnerable.
Yes.
And it's easy to say, but it's really hard to do, particularly to a board, or particularly to an older, senior leadership team member, where you may be the first person getting the customer viewpoint. You may be someone who is seeing what goes on silo to silo. You may be the person who, in fact, is noticing some of the behaviors that are putting the brakes on growth. But to get somebody to articulate that to a superior or even to a colleague is very tough.
Talk about vulnerability.
The issue of open, honest, and vulnerable, and really to the point of rating each other as we sit around the table.
And honestly, that's right. I have a wonderful woman I met not long ago who is the president of a large insurance company. And she and I were talking about the times sort of changing, because I remember going to board meetings where there are 49 men and none in me. It was not it wasn't a good place to make terrible statements. But she was telling me about being the coat girl. And I said, what does that mean? She said, well, it didn't matter what meeting I was going to. The guys would hand me the coat to hang up. And she said, so here I am in Lloyd's of London, insurance person, and I have a big deal to negotiate with them. I walk in, and my colleagues there, and they don't know who I am, so they give me the coats to hang up. And then he brings me around to the front of the table, introduces me as the person who's coming with this big deal to discuss. And of course, they, on the one hand, they felt embarrassed. On the other hand, she said it happened all the time. She was going to be a speaker at an event, And she came in early, and nobody knew who she was. So they gave her the coats to hang up. And so it's an interesting transformation going on in our society that I hope can happen sooner than later, so that my granddaughters can find a better place where they are really embraced. To your point, they're capable, they care, and can the place, the culture in which they're going, understand how to make it work together. So I bet you had some experiences too.
Well, I think, and this particularly, I think, relates to new members of the team. Hopefully, they're female.
Yes.
And that is the ability to begin to create a picture that's 3 years out, begin to visualize that picture and what it might look 1 year out. And while this is not rigorous 300-page, 400-page, quote, strategic planning, as you said, visualizing this, having everybody be able to visualize this, we would like to be a company that looks like. We would like to be a company that in the mirror looks like our customer.
Yep.
We would like to be a company who, in fact, exhibits these open, honest values all the time. And it's hard to do because, as you said, it requires painting the picture, and you only can paint the picture through personal stories.
One of the guys said to me, there's some great research that said most of us do not live in a diverse out of work life. We live in a pretty comfortable place where we're all very much the same. We go to people and gravitate to people, whether it's in our community, our church, our golf place, whatever it is, with people who look like us and sound like us. So where do we get trained on being among diverse people? And I thought it was a very astute observation about how we're trying to do something in the workplace that doesn't reflect the non-workplace society as a whole. And nobody has a lot of skills on any of the sides here, whether it's guys and gals or, white folks or people of color, to figure out how do we do this. We don't learn simply by coming to work at 9 and even remotely. So there's some really important stuff for you and a little for me to really work on, isn't there?
Well, I think, the management phase, of course, is what doesn't get paid doesn't get done, or what doesn't get noticed doesn't get done. And I think in this area, having these measurables, these accountabilities, really critical. So one of the issues, of course, in terms of saying this is how my role relates to the overall company goal, is a way of taking it from just a flag waving kind of initiative to making it mission critical.
Yeah.
It could involve people, it could involve to-dos, it could involve these measurables that in fact are driving the business forward. Many people say, well, let's just look at revenue and profits. And in point of fact, the structured accountability chart says, no, structure first, people second. Let's look at those roles, those functions in the company that are truly driving the business.
Yep.
As you know, in many cases, particularly with these tech-driven companies, it's not the frontline sales guy. It's not the production engineer. It's somebody else. But to have them be able to relate what they're doing to a measurable that in fact gets reported on, and can be related to this, quote, soft stuff, or it can be related to hard numbers.
It's and these are interesting times. Can you talk a little bit about EOS so that our listeners know why that can be such a valuable methodology for entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it's very interesting because those of us who sort of stumbled on EOS after trying to do it ourselves said, yes, this is perfect. One, nothing new, no latest Harvard Business School magic bullets or silver pills. Number two, simple stuff that's been around, exercises and tools that have been around for 100 years and will probably be around more. And number three, simple, gets it done. Yep. So I think the beauty is that it's a framework. It is a way of thinking. It is some tools that can be put on top of whatever you're doing, whatever business you're in, and whatever size you are. Now, at its most impactful, sort of $2 to $20 million getting out of the blocks, and then 20 to 200 million, where you're really establishing the momentum of the business. And essentially what EOS does is creates this vision traction organizer. On the vision side, vision, people, data, sort of exposes what's going in the business, but then getting better at knocking issues off the plate.
Yep.
How do we in fact get better at really dealing with these issues rather than just pushing them down until the next meeting? And then process, documenting process to do it the best way every time. And then traction, ironically, at the bottom of the pyramid, related to the others, because the adage that you live with all the time is, if you don't have traction, vision becomes hallucination.
Well, we've always said that.
Make this great picture of what you want the company done, but then there's terrible execution.
Yep.
But in point of fact, the sort of model to give someone a view of where they might get at the end of the journey is just 6 or 7 components. But if you as a leadership team can move from the 30 or 40% level of execution, where most companies are, in fact, succeeding despite themselves, up to the 80% or 90% level of execution, you'll feel like you're flying. So it's very interesting because it is both a guide because of these tools that can be mastered, but it also is, I think, a very strong cultural element, as you said, for attracting the kind of people that you really want to work with.
Well, we've learned a long time ago that humans like structure. Adults like structure. They like games with rules. And if you think of life as a big performance or a game, without the rules, people don't know what to do. Do I swing? Do I not swing? You know, did I score? Or did I not score? So it offers people a methodology that's well structured and gives them processes to achieve the results they'd like to get, without making it feel as if they aren't creators or innovators or all those things that they valued as an entrepreneur. So it has enormous value. And many entrepreneurs have never had any life inside a large corporation. So there was no training ground, right?
Right. And if you talk to a lot of your Vistage friends, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, having something that really is only 3 sessions to implement, you can spend a year or 2 getting better at the execution on a quarterly basis. But having something that can be easily understood and translated very quickly into actionable results. I mean, you literally can feel the results in 60 to 90 days. Becomes very powerful for the team because they feel like there is, to use the word, traction, that they are beginning to hit the ground. And I think what's interesting in today's environment with all the new technology tools and artificial intelligence tools and so on, the fact that you don't have to throw anything out and replace it, the fact that you don't have a large 3 to 6 month training for a new system that everyone has to learn the language for it, that you don't need a technical expert to do something that has been, you know, sort of a menial task in the company. So I think what's important is to use a framework.
Yeah.
You know, their statement is a company can only run on 1 operating system. If it's running on 5, you're in trouble. As you said, you have too many people.
Yep, move in 2 directions. But it's interesting because it is once you grab it, you can't do without it. It becomes the way you see the world, which is exactly what it's supposed to be, a view of the world that gives structure and order to a very powerful business model so everybody can get aligned with it and make the progress they need. And they also have that, do they have monthly or quarterly reviews of them, of EOS? Quarterly.
Quarterly.
Yeah.
There's a rhythm, this 90-day rhythm of quarterly reviews to come up for air and say, where have we been? What do we get done?
And what comes next? I know it's real important. So Jim, it's been absolutely wonderful. I'm glad we've had our time. I feel like we've been in each other's living rooms and just enjoying the conversation. A couple of things you don't want our listeners to forget.
Well, I think there are 3 things. The first is, doing the soft stuff is hard, but having a framework to do the soft stuff is really important. I think the second thing is that if a leader can establish a personal presence, I find this particularly with female leaders, that the presence is yours personally, but people, because of your value system or the value system you want to attract, find it a huge magnet and really want to work there. And with the current talent shortage, it is a huge hook. And I think the third thing is sort of practicing this adage that we've been talking about on this call of being open, honest, and a bit vulnerable.
Yes.
Because as Boyatzis says, leadership doesn't happen unless you have a follower. To have leadership resonance, you have to have someone who's actually going back and forth with you and contributing. So I think that's what we want to do up and down the line of these companies, whether they're 20-person companies or 200-person companies or 500-person companies.
It's very interesting. I teach 2 leadership academies, and one of the sections in there that's important are followers, to your point. We spent a huge amount of money developing leadership programs, none on followership.
Right.
And so we sort of hope that you'll know what kind of followers you have, and you'll know how to mobilize them and get them to do what has to be done. But we've got it all backwards, because unless you can begin to develop the folks who are going to be part of this collaborative team or whatever you want it to be, the followers watch. And the leader, runs around trying to get stuff done. And to your sense of delegating in some fashion, the follower has to know they're accountable and responsible, and that the whole thing doesn't happen unless they have a role to play. So followership, I'm finding a fascinating part of the Leadership Academy. And I haven't quite asked them to change it to Leadership and Followership Academy. But in some ways, every leader is a follower. Even the CEO has to be a follower to the board. And we're all accountable to someone.
Exactly right. And I think the issue that it just runs parallel with that is the fact that larger corporations, as you know, used to take care of you, and that sort of shifted, and people felt the corporate contact track was broken. Well, in these smaller companies, people are working with you at will.
Yes.
And contractually at will. So in point of fact, you want this compelling, I think, sense of mission, vision, and values to be really palpable, to be a great leader.
If your purpose isn't one that is compelling and attractive to others, and they don't get it, and you don't talk to them a lot, I say you have to keep telling them the same story over and over, or they'll make one up, because they're perfectly happy making one up, and they're the hero in that made-up story. You're not. And they're doing it really well just by them, and you're not. So it's a whole nice, wonderful thing about humans. Anyway, it's been such a pleasure. Jim, if people would like to reach you, what can they do to do that?
Well, we can, in fact, connect by email, but, the simple cell phone number is 917-913-4282. The not so simple email address is jim.cornehlsen, Cornehlsen, a Danish name, at Artemis Partnership, ARTEMIS partnership.us.
Well,
so one of those ways I would love to engage in conversation. And what I do typically with leadership teams is have a discovery session of an hour or 2 just to talk about the current state of the company and how they're feeling.
Yep. Well, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we do in our podcast, so we put them into a blog with all of this information. So whether you're watching it or you are listening to it or reading about it, there's certainly enough places where we can help you find Jim Cornehlsen if that's something you'd like to do, and we can help because we like to help. So thank you for all our audience, our listeners, our viewers, however you like to enjoy this. It's always my pleasure. So every Monday comes out something new, and I've got a whole lot of good ones coming out just for you. Folks like Jim who want to help you see, feel, and think in new ways so you can do it. Remember, what we preach is if you see it, you believe it, and you act on it, things can happen. But if you don't act on it, not much is going to happen. So you can speak the speak, but now it's time to do what has to get done. And the times, they are changing. Our books are all available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all your local booksellers. Please get a hold of one. Read either On the Brink or Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women in Business, and tell us what you think. The reviews have been quite exciting. And quite frankly, I'm honored that people like it so much. It's so much fun.
Well, and I can make a quick comment about Rethink. I dove into it sort of thinking it was the subtitle, but in point of fact, it is a wonderful story of leadership that succeeds.
Yes.
And that, of course, is what we all are striving for.
And these are all women who are doing it. And they say, of course we can. And everyone who says, oh, no, you can't. Of course we can. So the times are ready for us. Anyway, info@andisimon.com is where you can reach me. And as you know, we're always ready to hear from you. And we'd love to get your notes and how many folks have come to us through the emails that you've sent from across the globe. So enjoy the day, stay well, stay healthy, and smile. Bye-bye now.
It's exciting. Thank you.